The Week in Bible Prophecy, a Prophecy Watchers podcast.
Welcome to the program today. Mondo Gonzales here in studio, and I have through Skype Bill Salus all the way from California, and we're going to be discussing the Middle East. I mean, what a meltdown that's been happening, and some interesting things over the past few weeks that are going to be very fascinating to talk about. I want to remind everybody we just got back from our Christmas in Branson Prophecy Conference. Bill was there with us, and so if you missed it, you can still get access to all of the speakers and their presentations. You go to prophecywatchers.com, and you can just scroll down to the live streaming, which is now on demand. You can check that out. Also, just let everybody know, if you missed us there in person, you can join us in Orlando. We're turning our minds towards the Prophecy Conference there, Orlando, Florida, March 27th through the 30th, 2025. It's a great time to be in Florida. Nice weather there, and the hotel there is great. You can, again, check that out at prophecywatchers.com and just scroll down to Orlando. Well, Bill, you were here at the conference with us, and lots of conversations. Certainly, it seems to be every time we have a conference, something major happens in the Middle East, whether it was October 7th or even this. Kind of share a little bit about what you spoke about in Branson.
You know, that's really a good point, Mondo. On October 7th, I think, if I recall, we were in Oklahoma at your conference, and that's when the Hamas massacre occurred. And then at your last conference in Branson, what a wonderful conference that was. I mean, Christmas in Branson. We had the Syrian scenario of the uprising going on and the Assad regime fleeing. So it seems like every time you guys have a conference, something massive in the Middle East goes on. So who knows what we'll be talking about in Orlando.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, you and I were talking just a little bit before that this whole scenario, you know, you and I, we've done programs, you've done programs, of course, you've written a lot about this. We have the overall arching prophecies. And for people watching, you know, this is always the kind of the fun things. I mean, let me just give an example. You know, if you were to look in the Old Testament, you know, living around 50 BC or even 5 BC, you have Micah 5:2 talking about that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. You have Hosea 11 talking about him coming out of Egypt. And then you have the other Bible passages speaking about him being a Nazarene. How do we make all that work? But yet God has a way of, as we know, if we read Matthew chapter 2, how it all came together. So in the same way, Bill, obviously we look at these things and we see the big players and we see fulfillment for some of these players like Iran, Turkey, and Russia, but yet some of these stuff still mysterious in how they are coming together.
You know, that's one of the great lessons, I think, from the Syrian uprising that we're experiencing presently, even as we do this show. We have to be careful to speculate and sequence how certain things might happen. And I've done my share of that. I want to be careful of that. But I know the prophecies. I explain and explore the prophecies. And I try to suggest how they might sequence and happen. But I was under the impression, for instance, the destruction of Damascus, a prophecy that we'll probably talk about, we should probably will see happen as a result of even what's going on. But I was under the impression that would probably be the result of the Iranian proxy war, because Syria, before the regime of Assad just fell, was a proxy of Iran with Hezbollah and Hamas, of course, and the Hamas and Hezbollah have been essentially decimated by the IDF. But I was under the impression that it would be the proxy war that would bring about Israel having to destroy the city of Damascus. But now the proxy war is starting to fade away a little bit now because of what's been happening to Hamas and Hezbollah. So the main thing I think we need to do as prophecy, as buffs and teachers per se, is just learn the prophecies, teach them, see how the events seem to be shaping up and stage setting for them, and then sort of watch what happens. I mean, I'm going to take some liberties and speculate probably even a little bit in the show, but again, everything changes so quick in the Middle East. Got to be careful about that, because it's not about newspaper exegesis. You know, we got to exegesis, meaning the interpretation of a text, sacred text, namely the Bible. We don't want to go to the newspaper to do that. We want to go to the scriptures to do that. But again, of course, the news and the current events are pointing in the direction that marry up with the scriptures. So we kind of do that a little bit. We've got to be careful about doing that.
You know, I'm sure you're hearing about it, because I know that we are, and people writing in. And I guess let me just clear this out of the way right out of the gate. What we're seeing with these factions, which we can describe here in a minute, but they're definitely closed in. Newspaper articles, Damascus has fallen. You know, we know Assad is now in Moscow. He flew out secretly, took his $135 billion with him. So he's getting quite a warm welcome by Putin when you bring 135 billion with you. But the question is people now are online. I've been seeing this. They're saying prophecies fulfilled, Isaiah 17, Damascus has fallen, and the prophecy has been fulfilled. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, that conversation was going on even earlier in the Syrian revolution over the last decade, because Aleppo, for instance, and Homs and Damascus were looking like they were getting pretty much destroyed already by the revolution. But the prophecy, we have to look at the details of the prophecy. We're told in Isaiah 17, verses 1, that the destruction of Damascus, it says, behold, Damascus will cease from being a city, it will be a ruinous heap. But then we have a clue as to who does that and how quick that happens as we read down the road in verse 9 of Isaiah 17, which says, in that day his strong cities, meaning more than just Damascus, but other major cities, which will dovetail into Jeremiah 49 in a minute to find out what cities they're talking about, will be as a forsaken bough and an evermost branch which they left because of the children of Israel, and there will be desolation. So we find out that it's not the Syrian rebels, the HTS, they're called now, that have taken over Damascus. It's the Israeli Defense Forces that are involved, which is another prophecy. They exist in fulfillment of prophecy in Ezekiel 37:10 and elsewhere. We'll talk about that probably. But then we find out, and by the way, I want to just stop there for a second. It says the desolation is caused by the children of Israel, not the children of Assyria. Now, some people believe that the Damascus prophecy was fulfilled in 732 BC by the Assyrian Empire, but we need to realize that in Isaiah's 66 books, 66 chapters, the Assyrian is mentioned 41 times, but not once in Isaiah 17, because it's not them, it's the children of Israel. And then we find out that this happens overnight, because it says in Isaiah 17:14, behold, at eventide trouble before the morning he, in Damascus and the masculine pronoun, is no more. This is the portion of those who plunder us and a lot of those who rob us. Meaning in self-defense, Israel takes out the city of Damascus overnight. Appears to be what's being said there. So, I mean, I think this prophecy is definitely becoming even more possibly larger now than when the Assad regime was there, because Israel's now hit Syria over 350 targets in the last 4 days since they started attacking. Largest incursion from Israel since the Yom Kippur War into Syria. And they're not messing around, because they realize that the chemical weapons that Assad had, the meager navy that he had, the missiles and the air force that he had, those could all fall easily into the hands of this HTS group now, this radical terrorist group, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda anyways. So they're probably even worse than the Assad regime at this point. At least Assad, as bad as he was not attacking Israel. He was just becoming a corridor for weapon transfers from Iran to Hezbollah. Now, Israel does not know what they're going to get with this new group in charge here.
Yeah, and I'm going to, just for the sake of people watching, I want to summarize that just within Islam, going way back to the 7th century, you have two groups. You have the Sunnis and the Shiites, which have been at their throats, based on a lot of other reasons which aren't important. But if you want to understand the players, Saudi Arabia is Sunni, Turkey is Sunni, and so you have those two groups coming together. And really the place in the Middle East where the Shiites are is Iraq, Iran, certainly Hezbollah, Hamas. But these groups that have come in now and have taken control are Sunnis. So they hate Iran, they hate the Shiites there. And Assad himself was a Shiite also, again, a minority in Syria being mostly Sunni. So you can imagine since 1970 when his father came in as a Shiite and now controlled this Sunni populated area. So they were always a minority, but they had control. So what you're seeing now is, again, these other factions, several of them, even going up to Turkey and the Kurdish rebels. So you have these rebels coming in who have taken over and pushed out. They hate Hezbollah as well, who is Shiite. So they pushed out Hezbollah. They hate Iran. They've got rid of them. And then, of course, Assad's army has fallen. So now you have this Sunni bloc that is there, which is, again, supported by Turkey for sure. So that's kind of the big picture. But as we know, these rebel groups, they don't often want to work together because everybody wants to hold the cards at the end and be in power. So even the Sunnis are still they're pretending right now in the sense to get along, but there's still factions that want power. Anything to add about that, Bill?
No, I think that's good because the demographic over there is all messed up. The patchwork of that quilt is just terrible. You got Turkey got their people they're supporting in the northwest. They're trying to keep the Kurds away from getting a state and expanding more toward Turkey. You got the Kurds in the northeast, supported primarily by America. They're trying to protect their interests. They want a Kurdistan, which has not happened yet. You've got the factions we're talking about here with the HTS, the rebels taking over Aleppo and Homs and Damascus and threatening Jerusalem even. There's a video recently coming out hitting lots of the YouTube channels talking about we want to come and take Jerusalem next, That's unsubstantiated, but that's their goal ultimately. And that's the common denominator, by the way, is that all these groups, whether they're Sunni or Shiite, they don't like Israel. They hate the Jewish state. And that's ultimately why we're going to see these prophecies find fulfillment. But you also have, in this patchwork, you have the U.S. troops that have hit over about 75 times or 100 times now, I think also since the last 4 days, trying to stop ISIS from regrouping again, just like the rebels have regrouped with HTS. So this is a crazy period of time over there. I use the analogy with what Israel's doing. You got two houses. You got house number one and house number two. And house number two has got infested with rats. I mean, people didn't take care of it. Several thousand rats would come into house number two. The people who live there have evacuated. Now house number one, which is clean, that would be representing Israel, is clean. They're concerned, are they going to wait around for the rats to repopulate and exponentially and come to their house, or are they going to take down that house? And that's what you're seeing happen right now. Israel seized the opportunity as an exceedingly great army that will destroy Damascus in Isaiah 17:9 and elsewhere, doing what they've got to do to protect their country. And let's not forget the fact that Israel took out Hamas, is decimating Hezbollah, has been one of the reasons why the Assad regime fell, because Russia is busy with Ukraine, Iran's busy concerned about its nuclear program and losing its proxies. The Levant that they wanted, the crescent that they wanted to have happen is falling apart. And now Assad regime was left on their own and was encouraged by Russia to flee immediately before he was toppled. So the Israeli Defense Forces in fulfillment of prophecy has pretty much been the cause to their successes against Iran's proxies to have the fall of the Assad regime. But again, that has now opened another avenue for the other bad actors, Al-Qaeda group here, HTS, etc., to come forward now and create even more potential concerns in Israel's neighborhood.
Yeah, if we think about all that Israel's done, there was a video I saw where right there, I've been up there before, Mount Bental. You can see right into Quneitra, across the border into Syria. Actually, was just there last year, and now they're digging this gigantic trench. Big machinery in there. I mean, it's like 15 feet deep. 30, 40 feet wide, all the way down, in order to prevent any sort of tanks or any other things to get across the border. But as you said, there's been close to 500 either sorties or other actions that have taken place. And they've destroyed over 86% of Assad's military air force, and just 80% of the other stuff. You think about the tanks and the weaponry and the missiles and the cruise missiles, and then even going over and destroying two naval bases. I mean, they filled the vacuum. Like you said, they did not wait. And I was actually very surprised by Israel's swiftness in going and accomplishing, because they knew we got a moment here. We have an opportunity, and we're going to make sure that none of this gets in the hand of the rebels, because, as you mentioned, they have said, Jerusalem's next. Even though publicly, the main prime minister and others, they're not saying anything negative about Israel right now at all. So you wonder we know what the final end game is, but I think they're trying to play nice in order to establish their own power. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, they're acting like the new regime here is going to be a moderate, trying to appeal to everybody. But in reality, they're probably going to turn out to be another Taliban and implement Sharia law. They're already persecuting Christians. and other things like that. So the true colors are going to surface soon. They're going to be another authoritarian regime, much probably like the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
But the concerns for Israel's perspective, they're moving forward trying to maintain their existence. I mean, it is an essential threat for them. They haven't listened to the Biden administration. They went into Rafah and they took out the Hamas. If they would have listened to Biden, Hamas would still be a terror group over there. They went into Lebanon against Biden's best wishes, and now they're moving into Syria. They've got to do these types of things because they've got their own issues going on, of course. And they've got still about 60,000 people evacuated who don't want to go back to the north, and back to their homes in Haifa and those other places. So Israel's doing what it has to do. They're not really listening to anybody other than their own leadership. And God's got the right leadership in place at this time. And the exceedingly great army is starting to manifest itself. And the other thing, too, we were talking about earlier before we came on the air here, another prophecy that's finding fulfillment, not just the emergence of the exceedingly great army, but we're also seeing Israel expand territorially. They've got the Golan Heights, but they've also moved in east of the Golan Heights into the separation zone from 1974 that was established after the Yom Kippur War between the Syrian regime, Assad back then, and Israel. Now that regime is gone, so Israel's moving forward even eastern of the Golan Heights. They're also moving into southern Lebanon, and the buffer zone there. And these things they're saying are temporary for their protection, but they won't be. You watch Israel continue to win wars and expand territorially. Those are prophecies. We find them expanding territorially in Jordan in Jeremiah 49:2. And in Obadiah, we find them going up as far as Zarephath, which is in southern Lebanon, just below Sidon. So we see Israel's going to expand territorially. They already are. The Israeli Defense Forces are going to win victories. They already are. And this is just the start of more to come, Mondo. Lots of prophecies on these topics.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And, let me ask you this in the sense of what do you think? So now you have this new group, and of course, just to remind people, Hamas are Shiites. And so we've seen lip service being played by Saudi Arabia, who are mainly Sunnis, of the Palestinian cause. But, behind the scenes, those that are in the know, they say quite often that Saudi Arabia, as Sunnis, don't really care about the Palestinian cause. They give it lip service because they're Shiites and they don't like them anyway. How does this really contribute to Trump coming in and the whole idea of the Abrahamic Accords and some thoughts about that? What do you think? How does this play into that?
Well, a couple of things with respect to what you're talking about. First of all, Egypt and Saudi Arabia have both condemned Israel's movement into the buffer zones of Syria beyond the Golan Heights. Ultimately, they are bannering the Palestinian plight, and they will continue to do that. Not so much that they're fans of the Palestinians, but ultimately they're enemies of Israel. Mm-hmm. I know that Trump is going to try to bring Saudi Arabia into normalized relationships with Israel. Presently, Saudi Arabia is opposed to that. According to several biblical prophecies, I don't see that happening, to be quite honest with you. But Trump will try to move forward with the Abraham Accords. That's what we're understanding. He did, when he was president before, he was the best president in Israel's favor than any other president in our history. Recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and allowing Israel to have sovereignty over the Golan Heights, getting out of the Iran nuclear deal in May of 2018. Just to name a few things that he's done. And of course, the Abraham Accords in 2020, I believe it was. So basically, he's going to try to do that again. If we're following his historical precedent, he's going to try to do that again. But all the dynamics are so much changed right now, Mondo. I'm not sure that he's going to be able to pull that off. And the elephant in the room is Iran's nuclear program. Now, they're going to be starting to get very desperate because their proxies have fallen by the wayside. And they've been enriching uranium to the point where they could have a nuclear weapon, and probably already do have several nuclear weapons already ready to go. They're going to probably be getting desperate and figure out, with Trump coming in and Israel on the move, and their inability now to get weapons going through Syria to Hezbollah, who's been choked off now by this whole Syrian thing, they're probably going to get desperate. And Israel, of course, realizes the time to hit their nuclear program is now. And that's always been Israel's concern, that Iran will not be able to get a nuclear weapon. And Israel's attack back in, I think it was October, they took out the missile defense systems in Iran, and they realize right now that Iran is essentially naked to an attack on their nuclear programs. And then we could now look at the prophecies in Jeremiah chapter 49 with Elam, because then there's nuclear facilities in Elam. The Bashar nuclear reactor, Isfahan is there, Natanz is there in the Elam territory. There's a nuclear facility. Shiraz is there where they do a lot of the research. And that talks about a prophecy that Iran gets hit on the west coast in ancient territory of Elam with a disaster, probably nuclear. So now that could be another thing that's in play now because Iran is very vulnerable and Israel's on the move.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point because Iran's desire to sacrifice their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and others, for the sake of doing their bidding. Well, now those are basically neutralized, and so the idea of Iran realizing, oh look, we got several things against us. Well, our proxies are pretty much neutralized. We got Trump coming in who is not favorable to us. And so they're going to potentially give Israel carte blanche and to attack the nuclear sites. The American military, all the aircraft carriers are still there. They haven't left, which of course would provide support. You also have now the other opportunity to fly through Syrian airspace because they've got rid of, again, all the air defenses, or most of them. And so the time seems to be now in the next few months. And I imagine that does have Iran pretty nervous because, and of course, we've already seen that they've accelerated their uranium enrichment. So here we are. I mean, pretty fascinating to kind of come into a head almost.
Yeah, and the other dynamic that I think is probably going to emerge here, probably in the near future, is an uprising inside of Iran itself by the people. They're seeing what's happening in Syria right now and thinking, we would like to also get rid of our regime over here in Iran because they've been very repressive on the Iranian people. And of course, they've spent all their money on the proxies and the economies are hurting. So you might see something developing there as well. So Iran has got to be concerned about that matter as well, not just Israel, not just the United States with Trump, which certainly got them concerned, but also their own people with an uprising potential, which I believe is very real probability at this point.
Mm-hmm. So when we think about, let's kind of, I know we've done this before, but in this kind of new scenario, we have Ezekiel 38, Jeremiah 49, Isaiah 17, and certainly other passages. How does this come to play? Let's throw in there even Psalm 83, which of course you've written a lot about. What's your thoughts right now? How do we kind of just? I know we're living in the world. We have the big prophecies that we know, but we're kind of pondering these things. Kind of summarize for us what you've seen in as it relates to some of that.
Well, I think the next things I would be on the lookout for primarily will be the destruction of Damascus. We talked about in Isaiah 17. It's interesting, on a side note, let me pull this up real quick. There's another camera angle to the destruction of Damascus. Remember I said in Isaiah 17:9 that the desolation will be in other major cities by the children of Israel. Where are those other cities, and how could that happen? We might have a clue in Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 23 through 27, which says, against Damascus, Hamath and Arpad, that would be Homs and Hama, and Arpad would be Aleppo, are shamed. They have heard bad news. They are faint-hearted. There is trouble on the sea. It cannot be quiet. Now, let's stop there for a minute. If we look at this literally, those are cities, the little cities, major cities that well, apparently there's trouble on the sea. What sea? The Mediterranean Sea, where Israel has Dolphin-class nuclear weapons, nuclear-capable submarines. They used the sea just recently now to take out the Syrian Navy in the port of Latakia, which is not a big navy, by the way, about 15 ships they took out, but there's trouble on the sea already because Israel's used the sea to take out the Syrian Navy. And it goes on to say, Damascus is grown feeble, she turns to flee, and fear has seized her, anguish and sorrows have taken her like a woman in labor. Then he goes on and asks the question, why is the city of praise not deserted, the city of my joy? That's Jerusalem. So in other words, this bad stuff's going on. Fear is seizing the major cities of Damascus included. But Jerusalem, why is it not deserted, the city of God's joy? Damascus is going to be destroyed, but Jerusalem is going to remain intact. It goes on to say that, therefore her young men will fall in her streets. That would be the soldiers, the civilians, and the men of war shall be cut off in that day, says the Lord of hosts. So another camera angle, the destruction of Damascus, there'll be dead soldiers, dead civilians, other cities struck. We find out the children of Israel are responsible in Isaiah 17:9. I'm looking at that, Mondo, as a very possible reality right now in light of what's going on. Israel is on the move. They're not holding back any punches. They're in a prison rules fight war. They know that Damascus, the rebels are going to come after them at some point. And by the way, the rebels are upset. They're fuming because they thought they could get these billions of weapons. They thought they could get the Navy by just taking it over. They saw how the Syrian army just abandoned their posts, which is one of the reasons Israel's now moved further into the Golan area and Mount Hermon. Mm-hmm. They're thinking, well, we can get all these weapons, the chemicals, and have our own air force, billions of weapons per se, and Israel just deprived them of that. So they're upset, and Israel may just keep going further and start taking out these cities, especially if they're provoked by the wishes of the rebels per se. They want to come after Jerusalem next. Remember, Jerusalem is the third holiest site in Islam, not mentioned once in the Quran, but the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock is there, and they want to hold on to those holdings there. They're seeing Israel on the move. They want to go to their temple. So ultimately, they're going to get resistance, from my estimation, from probably the Psalm 83 countries that surround the borders there. Also, the Iran prophecy with Elam. All three of these things, in my estimation, are looming even closer now, Mondo. In what order they'll happen, I would take a guess, but again, we're speculating, which is dangerous in light of what's happened here recently. We just warned about that in the beginning of the program.
Do you think that, based on what Israel just did in destroying most of the weapons that Assad had, this group that's there now, obviously they're pretty tenacious. They've been around. They haven't gone away. A lot of them defect from one group to the other. Even many of them are connected with ISIS, Al-Qaeda for sure. Do you think, how would you compare the threat level between this current group and understanding its history and versus Assad as it relates to Israel?
Well, I would defer to Israel's present military actions. They apparently think it's very dangerous. I mean, they're destroying every potential harmful weapon, Air Force, Navy that could come against them at the hands of these rebels who have, as I said in the video that's circulating, said, Jerusalem's next. Hamas, be patient. We're coming after the Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem. So they're vocalizing their threat if that's truly where they're going at this point. It's interesting, the Biden administration is saying we would recognize this group now, the new leadership over there, if they abandon terror, we take them off our terrorist list, and that sort of thing. And is that really going to happen, Mondo? I don't think so. This is their nature, and Israel is their prime enemy, and they feel like Allah is blessing them right now because they're on the move. They've just basically watched the Assad regime just fall over like a cheap suit. So in their estimation, from my perspective, they're dangerous. They feel very confident that Allah is blessing them, and they're going to keep marching forward, and ultimately that will lead them to lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem. In Zechariah 12:2, he talks about a final Arab attempt of the surrounding peoples, which I believe more than just this rebel group in Syria. It says at that time they'll try to lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem, the peoples round about, but God will make it a cup of trembling or intoxication at that time. So remember, there's a final siege coming. It'll be unsuccessful because we're told in Zechariah 12:6 that the IDF that governs the Judah will be the battlefield will be like a fire pan in the woodpile. The IDF will be like a fiery torch, and the peoples on the left hand and the right hand will be like sheaves. They'll be devoured by the IDF. So it's an unsuccessful siege, but it has not found fulfillment yet. And ultimately, I think all these roads are going to head toward Jerusalem, Mondo, and probably very soon, because I think God is ready to deal with this stuff. I've prayed for a long time, written about these prophecies. Years ago, I was praying, God, when are you going to curse those that curse Israel? That's part of your Gentile foreign policy. And certainly they're cursing them. The wars of 48, 67, Arab wars, 73, the stuff that's going on even with the proxies of Iran, per se. And ultimately, after years of prayer, I got this still small thought, or small voice, if you will, saying, what part of I'm a long-suffering God don't you understand, Bill? Then I realized, hey, it's God's long-suffering. We can't move the pages on the prophetic calendar forward too fast. It's at God's long-suffering pace, right? His merciful pace. But now I'm sort of singing a different tune here now. I'm not saying the Lord's spoken to me, but it's like I think God's ready to do this stuff. These prophecies are going to find fulfillment. His mercy's always going to endure. And many people, especially like in Iran, are coming to the Lord through dreams, miracles, visions, and healings per se. But I think at some point the prophecies have to find fulfillment. I think that this will find fulfillment in the very near future. And it won't be, it's been like over 75 some years, I think, since Israel became a nation in 1948. And there won't be another 75 years when the next prophecy happens. It'll happen, another one will happen in its heels, another one will happen on that heels. And ultimately, that'll all lead to when Israel's dwelling securely, without walls, borders, nor gates, can rebuild itself and become prosperous with plunder and booty. It'll lead to Ezekiel 38. That's the marquee prophecy where ultimately this will be going, when God will stop that supernaturally, that advance between Russia, Turkey, and Iran against a prosperous Israel coming for plunder and booty in the latter days, which we're in right now. God says he'll stop that with a great earthquake. Every man's sword, they'll be fighting against each other, infighting. And then there'll be great hailstones, fire and brimstone per se. And then God says, when that's all done and the world realizes I just stopped them, he'll say, I'll make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel. They shall not profane it anymore. The nation shall know I'm the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. And that's when God puts the world on official notice, when he stops this massive invasion supernaturally, that he's the covenant-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the promise-keeping God of Jesus Christ. And that's got to happen. It has to be in my people Israel. They exist today. The Arabs won't be able to wipe them off the map. It has to be a land of Israel, the Holy One in Israel, and that exists today. Arabs won't be able to take it over. Psalm 83, they want to take it over. It says, let us take for ourselves the pastures of God for a possession. Those Arab countries that surround Israel in Psalm 83. That won't happen because Ezekiel 38 has to happen, and God has to make the world know he's the covenant-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Do you see, in the past, in the teachings between Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38, you've talked a lot about the inner ring versus the outer ring of nations that you have there. Do you think that, it would seem consistent, do you think that this new Syrian group, which are primary Sunnis, do you think they'll ever decide to make an agreement with Iran to join in their hatred of Israel?
I think the Iran prophecies are independent of Psalm 83, and we have double prophecies with Iran in the end times. Both prophecies talk about the latter years. We just talked about Ezekiel 38, written about 10 years after Jeremiah wrote Jeremiah 49 about Elam. Ezekiel writes about Persia, which is most of Iran, in the middle part of it, the central Iran and northern Iran. About 596 BC, about a decade before Ezekiel wrote, Jeremiah, his contemporary, wrote about Elam, which hugs the Persian Gulf. We talked about nuclear facilities there, Natanz and Bushehr, etc. I think those prophecies are going to happen independently. If I took a guess, I think the Iran prophecy of Elam is going to happen probably soon, probably around the time of Damascus destruction. And I think that will lead to Psalm 83. And ultimately, after Psalm 83, Israel will win that war and can dwell securely and meet the conditions of Israel dwelling securely in the midst of the land, without walls, bars, nor gates, a prosperous people, safe dwelling. And ultimately, I think after that happens, Russia will then harness all the hatred of Iran and Turkey and all these other Muslim countries, North Africa and elsewhere, outer ring of countries not involved in Psalm 83, never harbored an ancient hatred of Israel like the Psalm 83 countries who share borders with Israel have. And I think ultimately that will happen after Elam and Jeremiah 49 and Psalm 83 and after Isaiah 17. I'm pretty clear that Ezekiel 38 happens after those things. What order the other things happen, I don't know. As I don't know when the rapture is going to happen, because that could happen in the middle of all this too. That's the good news for us, is watching this chaos in the Middle East. One of the other pre-tribulation prophecies, and I believe all the things we just talked about are pre-tribulation, will happen before the confirmation of the false covenant. It starts the 7-year tribulation period. I believe that the rapture will happen, of course, before that as well. And that could happen at any given moment in light of what's going on, Mondo. It could happen before, during, or after Psalm 83, before, during, or after Ezekiel 38. But it's going to happen, in my estimation, probably really soon. And we should be aware of that as believers in Christ.
Absolutely. I mean, we watch these things, we see prophecy come to be, shaping up. But at the end of the day, our goal is to help people say, look, we're living in these prophetic times, and most importantly, we want to make sure that everybody has a relationship with Jesus Christ, so that if the rapture does happen at any moment, regardless, that we're found ready. That really is the goal, that Jesus died for sinners to save us. And I love watching prophecy because it keeps me focused on all that he's doing in the world, specifically the gospel. The gospel itself, all the kingdom work that we do, it's not just prophecy all the time. There's actually very practical things and, of teaching of other kinds. Let me ask you this, looking forward to, here we are coming into 2025. What's your thoughts on, on Trump, him coming in? Will he try to resurrect the deal of the century? Any thoughts on some of that?
I think he will. I don't know that he'll have control of that, though, in light of what's going on over there. It's just out of control over there right now. I think he will try to, bring more people into the Abraham Accords, certainly buddy up more and more with Israel at this point in time. But at this point, Israel's in a war mode, a survival mode. They're not going to stop. They're going to probably even start. They may go against Iran. And if that happens, all bets are off for Trump. He's going to be mainly stuck with what could happen. Remember, the things we're talking about right now could adversely affect the American economy as well. It's just not isolated to the Middle East. Right now, we're seeing the Bitcoin hover around 100,000. We're seeing the stock market at an all-time high, standard S&P 500, et cetera, Dow Jones. These kind of things that we're talking about here could escalate into a position where Americans are no longer robustly living in the economy they have right now, especially if Iran has shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which they've threatened to do if attacked, which about a quarter of the world's oil still comes through that area. So, we don't know what Trump is really going to inherit even by January 20th in light of the movement that's going on in the Middle East. But I do think he's going to try to follow his old trends, historical precedent, increase more relationships and normalize relationships and stability with Israel, to the Arab countries around them. But he won't be able to get a lot of them involved because they're in the war prophecies of Psalm 83 and Isaiah 17, per se.
Do you see him, based on his kind of, get her done, gung-ho mentality, do you see him becoming frustrated with Israel in the sense of, not that he would necessarily withhold weapons from them like Biden, but, again, he promoted a two-state solution prior. So far, Israel has been very reluctant, and certainly with all the stuff going on, the timing isn't right, because there's no, after Hamas is gone, how do you have with what government are you working with? So it's a little bit premature to talk about a two-state solution, but no doubt Trump has done that before. Do you envision him, if Israel drags their feet, that he would get frustrated with them a little bit?
He could be. That's a little harder to understand at this point because his relationships are pretty solid with Benjamin Netanyahu. But he has made promises. One is the hostages will be released when he takes office, or all hell will break out, is a quote. He's also made promises that the Ukraine war would end quickly. He's got a lot of promises he's made, that he pledges on the campaign trail that he's got to try to fulfill. These are big tasks for him at this point in time. Hamas is not gone, by the way, just yet. They still got the hostages. Hezbollah is not gone, by the way, also. Estimates are Hezbollah had 200,000 missiles, according to a Jerusalem Post article in October of 2024. And 14,000 of those missiles were shot out up until October 7th of 2024. Was still left 186,000. Israel says they took out about 70% of those missiles also. So you back that out. It still leaves Hamas, as the Jerusalem Post is correct, with about 50,000 missiles. The chain of command is hurt. There have been leaders have been assassinated, but there's still a dangerous force to be reckoned with. Who knows if they're going to reemerge on some level? They were hoping to reemerge with the ceasefire to get more weapons through the Syrian corridor, but that's not going to happen at this point. So we still have bad actors to the north. In Lebanon, we still have bad actors in the Gaza area. Houthis are going to be firing up more as you watch. They're still sending ballistic missiles into Israel. Trying to take out Red Sea ships going through maritime efforts. So this is still a mess over there. Israel's still dealing with a lot of dangerous players all around them.
Do you think, I know one of Netanyahu, he's been very clear about the goals that he set out, that Hamas would be eradicated and there would be no future agreement with them or deal with them, that they would then still maintain some level of governorship in the Gaza Strip. Do you think do you think he'll still maintain that all the way to the end, that there is going to be no future role for Hamas as governing Gaza?
And I'm pretty sure he's done with the Hamas. He has made the comment with the Syrian things that are going on that he's going to stay out of that for now because that's Israel's situation, right? He's not. He seems to be in support of what Israel's doing at this point. I do think he may want to ultimately try to do a two-state solution. He was pushing for that before. But at this point in time, he is sort of yielding to Israel's wishes at this point because the dynamics have changed so much since his last term. He knows Israel's on the warpath, and he's seen that Biden's been ineffective in changing them. I think he's going to allow them to have their way. Again, I think the next thing to be watching for on the news is Israel taking out Iran's nuclear program. Yeah. Now, the Elam prophecy doesn't tell us exactly if it's the Israeli Defense Forces like we just read about. In Isaiah 17, the Israeli Defense Forces. But it says that Iran has enemies around them, plural, that will create a disaster. Seems to be military when you understand the prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 34 through 39. And ultimately, it does look like that area is going to be taken out because it says when it happens, there'll be a humanitarian crisis. It says he'll bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven and disperse all those affected people on that west side of Iran. They'll be scattered into the nations. It says there'll be no nations where the outcasts of Elam don't go. So this is a prophecy that has not found fulfillment. It seems to be ready to happen. And Israel is ready to do that. And Iran is very vulnerable right now. And that is a prime target because that's where Iran's all their underground missile, most all their underground missile launchers and portable rocket launchers are. Their ballistic missiles. The missiles that they sent over to Israel, the last two attacks, the 320 missiles and subsequently the 100 some-odd missiles, ballistic missiles, they came out of that area. And Israel knows where that's at. Just like Israel knows where the chemical and military sites are in Syria, they know where those dangerous sites are in Elam as well with Iran. So they know what to hit and when to hit it, and they're probably about to do that in my estimation. So don't be surprised if before January 20th, we don't see a prophecy find fulfillment, and maybe with Iran.
Yeah, I think the first half of 2025 is going to be pretty fascinating because looking back, remember that Trump shut off the faucet of money with Iran. He also shut off a lot of the money that was going to the Palestinian Authority because of their terror. They're paying the terrorists for that, and he said we're not going to do it. So that's going to be increasing the pressure a lot on certainly Iran as well, maybe to increase their desperation because their money's going to be shut off, as well as even the Palestinian Authority. To me, it's very fascinating. So, I mean, appreciate your time, Bill. Any final thoughts for us as we think about here we are, wrapping up 2024 into 25?
Yeah, two things, Mondo. You make a good point about Iran and concerns about Trump coming into office. They're definitely concerned about that. They saw how stiff he hit them before with sanctions. He's going to do that again. He's going to cripple them economically. They're also concerned about an uprising with their own people inside Iran. They may seize the opportunity now as what they see in Syria. He's also concerned about being vulnerable to Israel and attacking their nuclear sites. So those things are important dynamics to watch for. That's why I'm keeping an eye on that closely. But I think the main thing, Mondo, at this point, we did talk about Jesus coming to get his bride out of here, the rapture of the church. I think we need to realize that, things can still happen and affect this country adversely, but Jesus could also come in the very midst of all this, which was not appointed to wrath. He's going to deliver us from the wrath of the tribulation. He's going to keep us from the hour of trial. It's going to test all earth in the tribulation. And we're to comfort one another with these words. And that's what I would say we should close with, Mondo. We should comfort the believers with the words that Jesus Christ is going to come soon and get his bride. And in my estimation, we should be looking up because that event could happen in the very, very near future.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, thank you, Bill, for your time today. Again, it's always a pleasure to get and hear your expertise on all this. And thank you, everybody else, for watching with us. We're trying to keep you updated. A lot of confusion, a lot of players in the Middle East. But again, the scriptures are true, and we see the overall portrait of where this is all heading. And we certainly can see that a lot of things are going to be coming up in the coming year. So, Bill, thank you. Everybody else, thank you as well. We'll see you next time.